Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you a few thoughts on this fourth Sunday of Lent. The gospel for this Sunday is a very difficult one to understand just on first reading, and so what I'd like to be able to do is to read you the gospel, and I'll pause from time to time just to explain some of the things that can be a little bit confusing. This is a reading from the gospel according to John. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents?" Let's pause. The question came because of the theology of that day was, if ever there was a tragedy, someone, for example, this man, born blind, the question always is, why? Why would something awful happen? And the response was, well, somebody must have sinned, and this is God's punishment. But the fact that this man was born blind was a conundrum because who sinned? The parents? And so what? God is punishing the parents by having the child be blind? That doesn't seem fair. And well, then did the child sin? That doesn't seem possible. It was just a baby. So the disciples are caught up in this theological confusion. Who sinned? In other words, who was God punishing for all of this? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. Sin has nothing to do with this situation. It is so the works of God might be made visible through him." And this is the beginning of what's going to prove to be, for all the people involved in this gospel, as well as ourselves, a very difficult lesson. When he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on his eyes. That may seem odd to us, but that was a very common thing in the time of Jesus for miracle workers to do. They would take mud and smear it on people's eyes as a prelude for curing. And said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," a word which means sent. So he went and washed and came back able to see. Now, again, an important point. Jesus was not restoring his sight. He never had sight in the first place. He was born blind. What we are seeing here is a very important point that we'll bump into later on. It wasn't restoration, it was recreation. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is." But others said, "No, it just looks like him." We're seeing more blindness. He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man named Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed, and I was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on the Sabbath, which was something that was not acceptable in the time of Jesus. When the Sabbath came around, you did not do any extra work, such as making mud out of saliva and clay. So then the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. He said to them, "He put clay in my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man, like Jesus, how can a sinful man do such things?" And there was division among them. Again, another theological conundrum for them, given the theology which was guiding their lives. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight. Again, more blindness. Until they summoned the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself. In other words, what's happening here is his parents are throwing him under the bus. The parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged Jesus as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. And if the parents were to say to the Pharisees it was Jesus who healed him, then they would be acknowledging Jesus as the Christ, and they would be expelled from the synagogue. And when they say expelled from the synagogue, what that means is they are cut off, not just from going into the synagogue, they're cut off from all social life. They can no longer do business with other Jews, nor will other Jews do business with them. Their life as they know it is over. So rather than stand by their son, they just fobbed it off onto him. Again, they cut their son loose. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age, question him." So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise." That phrase would be for us the same as saying, "Do you promise to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?" In other words, a trial is beginning, and this man is on trial. "We know this man Jesus is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is I was blind and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen." Blindness again. "Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciples. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from." And this is the fun part of this gospel, because this beggar, who is nothing in the eyes of these Pharisees, is able to outwit these learned scholars when he says, "The man answered and said to them, 'This is what is so amazing, that you who do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, God listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man Jesus were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." So, who is the theologian here? This blind beggar has better theology than all of those Pharisees, which of course infuriates them, and they have no response. They answered and said to him, "You who were born totally in sin," again reflecting the fact that he was born blind and therefore sin was involved. "You born totally in sin are trying to teach us?" And they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Again, blindness. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him. The one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and worshiped him. Again, we see this man being recreated. Then Jesus said, "I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." And he who did not see, the blind man, physically and spiritually, now does both. And the Pharisees and the crowd and the parents, they are all the ones who apparently have sight, but they see nothing. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We see,' so your sin remains." There are three great truths that come from this gospel. The first great truth, and this is a tough one to live with, is to answer the disciples' questions about why was this man born blind in the first place. And Jesus responded, "Well, it's not because of sin." "Well, then why?" And he said, "It's to give God glory." Or in other words, somehow through this awful tragedy that has happened to this man, something wonderful is going to come. We're going to be able to see God's saving activity taking place. And that can be a very difficult truth to live with. Because when tragedies are happening in my life, I usually ask God, make it go away. I tend not to look at whatever it is that's causing me suffering and ask myself, where in all of this do I see God's saving hand at work? Where in this tragedy, this difficulty, this suffering, this pain, where do I see God's saving activity? And maybe when we are faced with tragedies, we ask ourselves why, we ask God why. The answer, which can be a difficult one to live with, is so that something wonderful can be born into the world. That's the first truth. And the second truth is that of blindness. The ones who should be able to see don't, and the ones who could not see did. So I ask myself, am I blind? And the answer is, of course. Of course I am. We all are. We all have our blindnesses. And so maybe instead of being able to say, I see, as did the Pharisees, or more commonly, that guy is an idiot. I know because I know what's right and wrong. That guy doesn't know what's right and wrong. And we can judge other people that way. And we do that from a perspective of, I'm smarter, I'm more intelligent, I'm clearer, I have more common sense. I see. It's very difficult for any of us to be able to say, maybe I'm blind. Maybe there's something there I don't see. And how necessary and humbling it is to have to need to say to somebody else, am I blind? Is there something I'm not seeing here? And the last great truth is there are blind people all around us. And can you blame a blind man for bumping into the furniture? No, he was blind. Sometimes we're that furniture. And blind people bump into us, and they hurt us, and they harm us, and we can get very angry with them. But perhaps if I realize that this person did me harm because they're blind, well, that doesn't excuse the harm and may not even make it go away. But it does give me a path to forgiveness, to be able to forgive that blind person for bumping into me and harming me. And if I can do that, well, then God's glory can be seen. And then I can, and maybe others can too, see God's saving activity at work.